Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Mariam and Srinivasan, also for making it. This book has actually gone in for its third reprint. So at least I'm happy to know that there are a lot of people who like to read, although I'm hoping they make it into a TikTok or a Insta reel and circulate it a little bit. So those of you who have read the acknowledgements would know that, or who have watched news would know that Srinivasan Jain is one of the most recognized primetime anchors on news, or at least was till the takeover of corporate India of the media was complete. Mariam has been with NDTV as well. In fact, that's where this entire book's idea was born. And I'm sure we'll learn a little bit about what the next steps and plans are. But let me get straight to the larger theme of this book. While it's called Love, Jihad, and Other Fictions, uh, and we can go into each of those separately. There's the whole electricity. For those of you who don't know, there was this whole controversy, which became an election issue, that UP Sarkar, before Yogi ji came, would give more electricity during Eid to Muslim areas, but would cut electricity in Hindu areas during Diwali, and such, which is not strictly love jihad, but this entire thing of as a political strategy, saying that the state gives you gives the minorities X and takes away Y. So other than Bijli, I don't know, Holi is around the corner, whether it's true for Pani, I've made notes. How many such cases of the fissures between Hindus and Muslims have you dealt with in this book?
So, firstly, thanks, Abhinandan, for doing this, and also Quorum for having us here. Um, so, essentially, for us as journalists who've covered politics and who've covered elections and who've covered, in a sense, the mainstream current of news for all these decades, this was slightly new territory for us to enter, because these sorts of theories that we've tackled in the book, which essentially propose a series of conspiracies that suggest that minorities in this country, 200 million Muslims and about 20 odd million Christians, are plotting to, in a sense, overthrow or overrun the majority. Over a billion Hindus will be overthrown by, the 20% will overthrow the 80%, have largely been confined to the fringe, to the extreme corners, in a sense, of the Hindutva ecosystem. But the reason why, Abhinandan, to your point about how we sort of came about tackling these theories, is because these are now no longer fringe theories. These are now part of the mainstream public conversation of political parties and high-ranking leaders of the current ruling establishment. So, from, as you mentioned, Yogi Adityanath, to other chief ministers, to union cabinet ministers, to MPs and MLAs and so on, have routinely been airing these theories, and in some cases, even passing them into law. So there are now a number of Indian states which have actually passed anti-love jihad laws, even though the theory itself remains unproven and essentially born out of a certain kind of, Hindutva fever dream. So this, to us, is this wider phenomenon, especially now as we enter elections, that we are in the era of the big lie. Uh, Politicians have always been creative with the facts, as the famous expression goes, that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. The late governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, is credited with that. So we always tend to have a thick skin about politicians bending reality or creating alternate facts to push their cause. And to some extent, there's a sort of business as usual nature to it. For example, the president of the BJP during an election campaign made the claim that the prime minister stopped the Ukraine war so that students could be evacuated. Now, we credit the prime minister with many things, but stopping a geopolitical conflict involving a world superpower is not one of them, at least not yet. There's a third term coming likely, so we'll have to wait and see. Now, that is still something which is not great, but is still not at the level of the virulence and divisive power of this idea. The big lie, or the big kind of uh, manufactured grievance, let me put it that way, that Hindus are under threat, the majority is under threat from the minority, is deeply dangerous for democracy, quite apart from the electoral aspect of it. Just as in America, the big lie of a stolen election, when it's amplified by someone at the highest level of power, can unsettle democracy. So, to us, this is, apart from the specific fictions we get into, and we can get into that in the conversation, this is a book which is a product of this moment when long, uh, you know, marginal theories and extreme views are getting this kind of mainstream platforming. Uh, it is not just transforming or distorting our politics, but it is altering us as a society. So our purpose writing it was partly political, that we were responding to these political fictions, but it was also, and we've mentioned this in our introduction, deeply personal, because we were seeing what all of this was doing to our own circles, your friends, your family, on shared WhatsApp groups and so on. These sorts of theories are constantly being circulated. And in a sense, it's poisoned our communal or our collective well. And so the idea was to say, okay, listen, you know, here's a kind of one-stop guide, which if you have an angry WhatsApp uncle who's at 6 a.m. sending you something saying, why did Manmohan Singh pledge the rights of this country to Muslims or whatever it is, or Aftab Shraddha is love jihad, then you can refer to this, or you can even give him a Diwali or her a Diwali gift, and hopefully uh, push back against this
Barrage of
divisive
WhatsApp.
and kind of tsunami of divisive falsehoods which are engulfing us as a society.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. It's just like Vasu said, it's not just, I mean, it is about opinions and conspiracy theories that have been mainstreamed like never before, but it's also about these are not just benign theories or opinions that people hold. These are divisive, bigoted theories that are having real world consequences. Interfaith couples are being harassed. People at during Navratri and when you had garbas, etc., you have people stationed outside because there's this fear of love jihad, which is again unproven. You have people disrupting Christian prayer halls and harassing women and preachers and priests, again over unproven theories of mass conversion in this country. You have people sharing personal photographs of people with multiple children to propagate this unfounded theory of population jihad. These are things that are having real world consequences that the minorities in this country have had to put through, I mean, have been put through all of those consequences that they've been jailed over it, they've been harassed over it. A lot of them are actually living in fear over it. I know we are highly intolerant of saying that there is intolerance in this country now, but that is what has happened because of these theories as well.
So I have a couple of questions, and sorry to cut in rudely with my question, but I'd urge you to buy the book to get a lot of the data that they've spoken about out, and there is about the whole Diwali, the cremation, the Shamshan versus the data of the whole thing that the Prime Minister himself did, the Shamshan versus the cremation ground, that they're giving more land to Shamshan. They've addressed that also here, but I'd like you to address, because both of you have been in the news ecosystem, some things that may not be in the book. So the people who are watching this online or even here live can get some. So two things. One is that you said this fringe always theories always existed. Is it being amplified by a power figure or an authority figure is the only reason people believe it? Because other than the data crunching, you I'm sure spoke to people. Did you ever get an idea of why people believe? Because like you said, the people who have known for years and people who we have actually known for years, who I've worked with during my news track days, I wouldn't recognize them today. So if you could just address and then go ahead and say whatever else you were saying, but you've been in a newsroom, people who you've worked with who never articulated the kind of views they're articulating now. Uh, and there's Thuk Jihad, Love Jihad, Ye Jihad, Wo Jihad, each. In fact, the NBSA, which is the National Broadcast, whatever the full form is, which is the self-regulating body of broadcasters, they have asked Times Now Bharat, Aaj Tak, and Network 18 to pull down shows which promoted communal disharmony. But those guys still have their shows. They've just pulled down that show and paid a 75,000 rupee fine. Now, these are the same people who exist in the news ecosystem. So, if you could just address what makes people believe things who you don't think would have believed it earlier. Is it just because a prime minister or president of the United States says it? Or is there more to the psychology of the digital? And B, what changed in newsrooms so dramatically that people who we've known for 20 years suddenly will say, "Tu the dushman hai"?
Okay, wow, these are like pretty deep civilizational questions, which I think all of us are grappling with. That were we always like this, and it just took someone to light the match, or is this something which has been, in a sense, induced or kind of triggered within our society? And honestly, I don't know if I have the easy answer to that question, especially in a space like this. One can only speak to what the facts tell us. Look, I mean, there obviously is a way in which we've all existed as a country with the whole history that we've had, right? And there's been this kind of schism in terms of religion and religious identity going back to partition and perhaps even years before that, where you largely assume that there's a social contract that you may have your differences, but you kind of broadly let live and let live. Maybe the kind of Nehruvian sort of ideal of a Amar Akbar Antony kind of secular coalition was partly a construct which was necessary to imagine India into existence as a multi-faith, diverse country. But ultimately, it is the cues from the top which determine the shape you take as a society. So you had an earlier generation of leaders who perhaps envisioned a different society. Today, we're now seeing an entirely different trajectory that we're taking, and it is in some ways being willed into existence by the current ruling regime, right? Through this constant, like volcano of divisive behavior, whether it is these sorts of, the airing of these sorts of theories, whether it is the kind of legislation that you pass, whether it is, as Mariam mentioned, in a sense, the institutionalized violence against minorities, et cetera, et cetera. So I would still largely, like my analysis of this would largely still be confined to viewing this as a phenomenon which is coming from a sort of a change in the nature of power in this country, where those who are currently ruling India are invested in ensuring that we do, in a sense, manifest this shift. And I think that's a very powerful reason why people subscribe to it. What you and I may receive on a WhatsApp forward, or see on Twitter, or wherever else, even before social media, rumors found other ways of circulating. How much credibility would you give that versus seeing actually someone in a position of authority, say it from an election stage, or say it in parliament, or say it in assembly, or turn on TV and watch every primetime debate amplify that same rhetoric? So the gatekeepers, the institutional gatekeepers of democracy, who are supposed to act as filters against all this kind of stuff, who are supposed to separate what is credible and what is not, and what is toxic and what is not, or what is believable and what is not, if they themselves actually become the amplifiers and perpetrators of this, how is it possible for any society not to succumb to that, right? So to your point about the Bijli, the Eid Diwali thing, that's such a good example, because one of the things we mentioned, point out in our book, is that there's a WhatsApp forward that says that in Sholay, the fictional village of Ramgarh, where Sholay is set, more electricity was provided in the Muslim area for namaz as opposed to the Hindu area, and poor Thakur had to wander around in the dark with a lantern because the writer of Sholay was a Muslim, was Javed Akhtar. Or they were Muslims, Salim Javed.
Full marks for creativity. That
Right.
is one hell of a.
Okay, so now you laugh at this, it's absurd. Cut to the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, a constitutional authority, actually saying it from stage. A version of it, saying that more Bijli was provided during Eid under the Samajwadi Party government versus versus Diwali, which we fact checked, and you can, the findings are quite interesting. So I'm saying if that is now the nature of, I come back to what I was saying, the idea of the big lie, that you have such impunity to air these sorts of theories and this kind of rhetoric and keep up this constant, uh, threat to the majority, then inevitably your social calculus will bend in that direction because, Abhinandan, there's nobody to put the brakes on it, right? Who's there actually calling it out? The institutions of democracy, whether it's the election commission, the judiciary, the media, etc., the brakes have come off. So I think, to me, one of the reasons why you have so much buy-in to this is because it's coming from the top and because the guardrails and the various those institutions that are meant to act as a check and balances have failed, largely.
I have actually 3 questions because then we'll open it out to the audience. We're doing this, Shiomi, till 9, is that right? 1 hour? Okay. So fine. So I'll try to put aside about 20 minutes for audience questions. So, to the point of why people are believing it, one is, of course, authority figures and the whole trajectory, all institutional filters are gone. Uh, from a newsroom point of view, when you went out to report, um, how journalists are received, how the information that you gather, has it changed, how you give it out or disseminate it? Are you a lot more conscious of it now? Because I remember, by the way, there's an interesting mix of people. The person on the extreme left is Islamic. The person on my immediate left is Hindu, and my sister, a Hindu, is married to a Muslim. So I'm a victim of love jihad by this by this logic. But I remember, shortly after 9/11, I was in the US and I wanted to, and I'd had an interesting experience at an airport with my brother-in-law because he had a pilot's license and I was in a Pathan suit dressed like this. So there was this T-shirt which said, "Don't panic, I'm Islamic." Now there's no punchline, but in the context back then, it was this T-shirt that seemed like a funny T-shirt. And I said, okay, let me buy that and give it to him because it would be funny, even though there was Islamophobia in a significant way. I somehow find that I can't make a joke of it here. It's just gone too far. Uh, do you, I mean, in the sense there were punchlines, I remember a lot of cartoons, there were many graphic novels which kind of satirized the whole Islamophobia there. Uh, Here, you cannot even, take it just seems uncomfortable. So do you think there is some sort of censorship that we have internalized, or you think it you can talk about it as freely, whether through satire or whether through news?
Um, I think it's because it's become less funny, right? Because it's no longer a joke for a lot of people. Islamophobia, like you said, has skyrocketed to such levels, be it even casteism for that matter in this country, that it's no longer a joke. The people who are at the butt end of those jokes do not find it funny anymore because that's their lived reality, that's their lived experiences. So I wouldn't call it maybe an internalized censorship. I think it's just that people have gotten more aware and they're more sensitive to those plights, and maybe that's why, I mean, it's not a bad thing if you're reconsidering a joke on Islamophobia.
But isn't satire a fantastic way to punch up? Like, for example, just
I mean, punch
I
up, right? Why are you
exactly.
punching down on the
Yeah,
oppressed minority?
yeah,
Why
but
you?
no, but the entire thing of that was it was taking a dig at the general, the oh my God. I don't know whether you remember there were these New Yorker cartoons that's someone walks in with a beard and everyone gets up and starts running out. So it was like a dig at the overall, and I remember there were many such. Jon Stewart did a whole show on that. I'm not sure today in India something of that nature that is actually commenting on the Islamophobia that exists would
So
pass
I
muster in our country.
No, so I think that, look, obviously, any means that you can use to send up prejudice and bigotry and so on is one should use those tools. But I think those things are more effective or more viable when you have a certain balance of power. between different opinions and different views
Institutions that are strong
or
enough to
institutions,
fight for
yeah,
something.
there is the kind of asymmetry that we have here today, which makes it very difficult to actually have those conversations. While unlike in America, where you have the rise of the right and all of that, but you still have a countervailing force
Institutionally, there is.
institutionally, financially, etc. But I think it's also important to make a point, Abhinandan, that this is not just about Islamophobia or something that just affects Muslims. Because I think what tends to happen is when one looks at this, even as a concerned, well meaning Indian citizen who may not be from a minority community, you say this is terrible, but this is largely happening to somebody else. Well, actually, it isn't. It's happening to everyone. We know this from country across country, like Pakistan, our own neighbor. The idea of human rights, civil rights, civic rights, builds around minority rights. So the architecture of how you actually create mechanisms of redressal for all citizens uh, emanates from when you ensure protections for minorities, and that then becomes universalized. So the idea that this is something that doesn't impact you or me or any of us who are not Muslim or Christian is a very dangerous sort of conception to harbor. Like, just take the small example of the Uniform Civil Code, which the state of Uttarakhand has brought in, which we know is a long pending BJP agenda, largely to target minorities, because they feel minorities, particularly Muslims, get special concessions under Uniform Civil Code, polygamy, and so on. But we've already seen some of the provisions they brought in about live in couples, right? Now that applies to everybody. So if one begins to see this as something that is challenging the wider architecture of civic protections and how it can affect everyone, then I think it just creates a greater buy-in that all of us feel this is something that is of concern, not just to a particular group, but to us as a society, as a whole.
That's the inevitable conclusion of, you know, any sort of prejudice. You will always find someone, and it impacts us. And like you said, the Uniform Civil Code, there were some very interesting questions about if you break up, do you have to then register that now you've broken up? You know, when you live together, like even functionally, there were things that are just not possible to, rules that are not possible to execute. But what they do is that it's a dog whistle. There is no way you can actually go through and follow that rule in any sensible way. But
Or even, sorry, let me just jump in and say, even take something like love jihad, right?
the definition, like you were saying.
Yeah, so love jihad is this theory that basically there's a Muslim conspiracy to seduce and lure Hindu women with a view to converting them to Islam and thereby affect demographic shift. This has actually become a very convenient tool to exercise patriarchal control over women by Hindu society, right? So then you can use that stick to say, oh, we'll get to decide who you can see, who you can't see, restrict your, how much you can, what time of the evening you can go out, restrict access to your phone, etc., etc. The sort of classic Khap Panchayat way of negotiating interfaith or inter-communal relationships. So again, a theory that seems directed at a minority community can actually affect everybody else. Because you have scores of young women, Hindu women, as it happens, who are going out and choosing their own partners. And then you have this tool or this instrument to say, you know,
Said.
you can't.
Yeah, her agency is completely denied. No matter if we've had the cases that we've debunked and or otherwise reported on during our time at NDTV, you've had the women herself come on camera or tell us in person that no, this is a consensual relationship. But despite that, you would have right-wing groups say things like, "नहीं उसको बहलाया फुसलाया गया है, उसको brainwash किया गया है." You're completely denying the woman's agency here. She has no, she's an abla nari. She'll always be an abla nari. She cannot choose herself. She cannot think for herself. She needs the men or her male guardians to decide what is best for her. She cannot decide that for herself.
Now, you know, the data on the Shamshan versus Kabristan, the Holy Wars. Uh, just today, there was this case of these Muslim youth who had been arrested for apparently, I don't understand why that's a crime in the first place, celebrating Pakistan's win. I don't know whether you saw that news. It was just out today, and it's emerged that it was just a completely cooked up case. Those guys, I don't even have the financial ability to provide enough food, so there was no chance that they'd get, yes, firecrackers, etc. Um, so because this, and I'm just suggesting, and you guys can see, because when I saw that, and I'd seen a couple other stories earlier, I think it was on Article 14 of similar cases, also the Delhi FIRs, which are copy pastes against Muslims. Uh, there would be data on something like this, like, we were discussing in the car. The whole concept of jihad is so vague that how do you even sift through data that what is and what isn't love jihad? It can change, the definition can change depending on where you go. But in case you are considering part two of this book, which I would like to suggest you do, because you guys are fantastic at what you do. How many such FIRs do you think there would be? Because, like you said, when the institutions turn this way, the amount of ridiculous cases that even in institutions that are working under a lot of pressure are calling out. Uh, I mean, do you think it would be viable to just pick up one state? And because, of course, you can't go through affairs all over the country, but is there any way of getting that data out from your journalistic experience?
So one thing about data in this country is that with each passing day, the opacity with this government and especially BJP ruled state, it's increasing. Even if you look at parliament answers, which I remember Supriya keeps mentioning a lot of the time. Supriya is our other co-author, Supriya Sharma from Scroll. So if we hadn't done the research for this book, say in 2022, a lot of the data that we have in this book may not have been possible because the parliament changed its website while we were working on this book. Now it's become much more difficult to search for answers and data on the parliament website, whereas it was a lot more easier earlier. It's still available, it's just that it takes a lot more time and there's a little bit of a learning curve there. So data is increasingly difficult. Even with, if you say like a state like UP, FIRs, a lot of the FIRs are supposed to be in the public domain, right? You're supposed to be able to download those FIRs. But there have been times when we were, even for this book, when we were trying to, there are some UP-based love jihad cases that we have looked at. Some of the FIRs we would be able to view it one day. The next day you go back and you start looking for it again, suddenly it's disappeared, it's not viewable, or they'll say you've been blocked for some reason, they think you're a bot, or whatever reason they tell you. It's data has become increasingly difficult to access now. So I don't know with part two by then what the situation would be.
No. So just to add to what Mariam said, that so it's not as if we didn't try to look for data clusters when we were researching this book. So a couple of things to bear in mind. Firstly, you're fact checking something which is not even defined, right? So it's a very weird situation where the people who are making the allegation have no burden to actually prove their case. We have to actually find a counter evidence to disprove something. So it's like my saying that you robbed a bank and you say, no, I didn't. And I say, prove it, right? So it's as absurd as that. Having said that, we still said, okay, let's, within this undefined universe of claims, how do we try to find silos where we can investigate it? And actually, some of it has even spilled beyond the boundaries of this book. I can share with you, with Mariam's permission, that while we were researching this, to your point about FIRs, the UP government has passed, one of the state governments has passed an anti-love jihad law. Of course, they can't call it anti-love jihad law because love jihad doesn't exist as a legal term, but they've given it some sort of name. And we actually got a silo of close to 500 FIRs that they've registered in the span of about the first 2 years after the law has been passed. So you can imagine the scores and scores of interfaith couples against whom these charges have been filed. What would otherwise have been routine instances of, interfaith love where the parental disagreement has kicked in, or where there's been some marital dispute or some relationship dispute. It just so happens that the partner, the male partner is Muslim and the woman is a Hindu, that the provisions of the anti-conversion law have been inserted. And that, of course, immediately makes it a much more trickier and complex case to negotiate. But again, you're stuck, or you're rather confronted with this massive mountain of evidence which you have to sift through with the limited resources we have. So this is a constant sort of game or cycle we're in, all of us are in, including News Laundry and all these other brave and independent sites that are pushing back, that these guys have created this playing field where it's impossible to literally say, okay, I will fact check this claim, and there'll be like 5 others. So I'll say like, Aftab Shraddha's love jihad. And you say, no, it's not. There's no evidence. Oh, but what about some other case? And what about this jihad? And what about, like now, the Assam chief minister has come up with fertilizer jihad, right? It's like mind-boggling. So it's a, it's a, it's a very lopsided thing. Like you have a small handful of independent media that's trying to, or fact checkers or whatever. And on the other hand, you have this huge.
And to your point, institutionally, if it was strong enough and enough media houses with the resources were actually countering fake narratives, there would be some balance.
Make a huge, yeah.
But yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the media is as much responsible for this. So, like, one of the things that we do in this book, again, not that the book is only about love jihad, but in the love jihad chapter, we look at a list that's been put out by the VHP of purported love jihad cases, which is essentially a catalog of media reports on love jihad. What we found when we were looking at that is a lot of the cases were branded love jihad by the media themselves, right? The headline calls it love jihad. During the entire piece, there's nowhere else. The girl hasn't referred to it as love jihad. The family hasn't referred to it as love jihad. But because the man was a Muslim and the woman was a Hindu, it was branded love jihad by the media themselves. So you are right. Like the media has dropped the ball at some point here. And if more of us do come together, and as many of you do the good work, but if there were more of us doing this, maybe the situation would be different.
Right. So, as promised, we have 20 minutes left. I'll open this out with questions. Just one request: if you could identify yourself when you ask the question, let it be a question and not a long monologue, so that we can have a conversation going. Because I've done this here very frequently. When we finish, people always come to me, why didn't you take my question? I was like, dude, because the guy before you went on for 10 minutes. I'm sorry. So we just like to include as many as possible. Go ahead, the gentleman. Then after that, we'll just go to the lady there. And I think there was someone there. One,
Thanks.
two, three, then we'll come to anyone's. Please go
Thanks.
ahead.
My name is Prashant. I have a small question in the sense that do you think the way we frame this is also somewhere a problem and that's subconscious? The example that you gave, Srinivas, was you rob a bank, you prove that I have not robbed a bank. But the fact of the matter is there's nothing illegal in this, right? Conversion is legal. It's legal for me to celebrate a cricket match victory of any company, of any country. And when you say that I have to prove on the facts of it that it's incorrect or correct, somewhere we also recognize that fact, right? And if I can just remember offhand, the very first major case that came of love jihad also in Kerala, there the same problem appeared, and it was only at the Supreme Court level where they finally said that, look, there's no problem here in the first place. You don't even need to prove this on facts. So do we go wrong somewhere there? And should the gatekeepers, so-called, and I don't fully buy this idea that the gatekeepers are no longer there. I think you guys are here. Ravish is here. So they've probably just moved houses and gone to YouTube. But yeah, hopefully. But I think somewhere those gatekeepers also need to make this point a lot more than just proving these things on facts, right? Because how long will you go on making these points on facts? And I'll just recount one small example of how it's happened in the US. When during Trump's tenure, a lot of the soccer players used to take the knee on the national anthem. Fox News did not say that we like these people, but they continuously kept saying that, look, it's ultimately a free speech issue and what they're doing is legal under their laws. They never said that it's right, what they stand for. They didn't have to agree with them. But that legality of there's nothing wrong here was very important in framing that issue. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, you want to take that? It is legal in many places. FIRs do it. FIRs are filed even if there's nothing technically legal.
No, no. So you're absolutely right. It's a very valid point that do you validate some of these theories by actually taking them on? So in the Kerala case, the original case was actually the High Court which struck it down, not the Supreme Court. That was a later case. But the problem here is that if you allow a claim made by a high ranking political functionary or by someone in a position of power to go unchallenged, then it does remain almost as a truth because it's out there as a claim. So if, for example, a claim is made that more resources were diverted A to B or to A community over B community, even if you turn around and say, so what, that's a minority community, they're entitled to greater resources, it is a fictional claim and it has a consequence on society, etc., etc. So I think we are ingrained as journalists to push back against misleading claims, propaganda, whatever it is, across the board, not just about stuff like this. So this is like kind of built into our SOP. So I think that that is not to me really so much of a debate. It's just about like, to me, it's kind of the reverse. It's about allowing any ambiguity in the question. So one of the problems of the current media moment is that everything is turned into a kind of he said, she said. That there is this, but maybe there's the other side. While what we're trying to do here is what actually journalists, I mean, this is our credo, that you say that based on verifiable fact, this particular claim doesn't hold. So it's not like an open-ended thing. You give a clear take on what the facts are telling you. So I think that's really the way I see, at least, is one way of trying to push back against, you know,
Okay.
falsehoods.
Now, just to answer your question on the question of framing, the way it's being framed, and you cited the example of what Vasu said earlier about I say you robbed a bank and you say you didn't. It's not that the journalists are framing these, it's framed this way, right? And it's being framed by mainstream politicians as love jihad is happening, it's illegal. They've always made it interfaith marriages have been made illegal, and that's been passed into law now in a lot of ways. So we have no
Primetime
choice
amplifying
but
it.
to, yeah, you have no choice but to call them out at that point.
Yeah, and primetime amplifying it. Yes, the lady at the back, please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Abiha. Generally, I don't do this, but I'm also Muslim. For context, I'm saying Muslim. Islamic doesn't have the same ring to it. I'm sorry. So, because you spoke about putting a break on it, I just remembered something from when I was a child, and I'll keep it really short. As a child during Eid at our home, we used to lose electricity in the morning during the namaz time. And you do namaz in community on Eid. It's a thing. So, and my child brain used to always be like, "Ye kuch jhol hai," because like I think they're doing this discrimination against us. And I then took this up with my father, who explained to me very nicely that because you do community namaz, you spread out of mosques and you go onto the road. And in India, on roads, you have live wires at a lot of times, which is why they have to make sure that
There's a
jab
very
namaz ho rahi
reasonable
hai,
reason for that.
yes. So they have to make the electricity go away. Now, and then they put DG sets so that your namaz can be on loudspeaker and all of that, which was great for me because like I learned something and I realized, okay, we're not being discriminated against. You said there's nobody to put a break on it. I'm just wondering if there's a small Hindu child who feels something similarly because of all this false news or whatever. Uh, and you've seen the data and the stats, and I am yet to read that book, although I look forward to. What is there that can put a break on that thinking, even in the child psyche or in the psyche of an adult? Because I know people who believe that this stuff is happening, this discrimination is happening.
Rational people who believe stuff, yeah, is there like a, just take the mic there, is there a social function that
So before NDTV, I worked at Hindustan Times, and a story that I'd done while I was at Hindustan Times that is still stuck with me is about the discrimination that children face in schools, especially Muslim kids. I had spoken to kids in 11th and 12th grade who said that their class teacher read the newspaper in the morning about some bomb blast, turned to him and said, "Saad, tumhare logon ne ye kya kar diya?" There have been cases of another girl saying that they had to decorate their school notice board with the flags of a country each week, and then Pakistan came up, everybody voted that she should do it because tera hi to country hai, and things like that. So I remember talking to experts, child psychologists, etc. at that point, and unfortunately, the onus is not on children. Like you said, your father spoke to you and gave you a reasonable explanation. It is on the adults, and it's about the adults who have they have to have that conversation with their children, and that's where children learn about society and their beliefs. Unfortunately, like we said, fear is a very powerful drug, and we have all been given a little chaska of it, and it's proving, which is why this is so dangerous, and which is why we need to fight back against this as well, because it's not just this generation that's going to bear the brunt. It might be even the future generations, because that's what the kids will learn. So it has to be about conversations at home. And as long as the society changes or we have fact-based pushbacks against these such bigoted theories, I don't see what can be done.
So just to add to that, that this is something that we're getting asked quite a lot in these conversations as to how do you actually try to convince people about this? Like what tools can you use? And I mean, obviously it's interesting for us as journalists to think about that because that's not primarily our function, right? Our function is to essentially like shine a light and lift the lid on malfeasance of any kind, speak truth to power, that kind of stuff. We are up against political fictions. So the response in some ways has to be political. What is seeping down at the level of schools, et cetera, is still a river that is flowing from the top. So there has to be a kind of public buy-in to this till the point where people feel in large enough numbers that we will not abide by people in power, you know, those that we've voted to power and we've given responsibility, spreading these type of falsehoods, and then we will act accordingly. Because at the end of the day, these are public representatives, right? They've been elected by the people, and if they're the toxicity that they're sort of constantly downstreaming is still being accepted by the populace at large, and they're still voting them back to power, that's a power that, you know, a handful of journalists or whoever it is, the other gatekeepers, are not going to be able to tackle. So there has to be some kind of way in which there's some public accountability to this.
Which is why institutions actually exist. That is the main reason.
Or if those institutions are not acting, then the people have to decide, like, do they want to continue to
Sure.
embody, you know, these individuals or these ideologies with power to allow them to do that?
The lady there, please. Yeah. Oh, sorry, sir. I'm sorry. He was third. I'll just come back to you. I'm so sorry. 'Cause we just. Yes, ma'am. Please.
Hi, my name is Rupinder. So I think you just said that some of it is not your job, and of course, it's not everything is not supposed to be the onus of journalists. But I do wonder that if you take a step back and look at some of these issues that have crept up in the last 10 years, right? Whether it is the issue of love jihad or the associating of the conversion with the Christians or the Khalistan movement with the Sikhs, or whether it is the universal uniform civil code. And do you sometimes feel that this is all actually an exercise into just a deeper state, and somewhere these issues are just ways of getting the state much and much deeper into all our households?
Either if you want to take that, now we can go to this gentleman. Right here. Do you want to take that? Or should I?
No, no, yeah. Go for it. Go.
See, no, I don't think it is a question of deeper state. I mean, I believe, having read a lot of RSS literature, including bunch of thoughts, and I interviewed Ram Madhav on it. There is the project is a social project. I think Modi ji's project is not an economic project or just power. I mean, there are other leaders who want power for the sake of power. I think there is okay, it's speculative. You'll have to get into, the leader's mind. But I believe, from what I've read, that the project is the Hindu nation, Hindutva. It is not that they'd abandon this if they see that they can get power by appeasing another community. No, it is not about deep state. It is not about changing the structure politically, or destroying institutions because they believe that a presidential. It is a socialist Hindutva project. That's what I believe.
No, so just to add to that, I think so. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about deep state. It's true, of course, that many of these theories do allow for a far greater invasion or an incursion of the state into people's lives. What would earlier be done through a kind of broadly patriarchal, conservative, social construct of how you interfere in your choices now has the backing of the state. But I think the longer game here, and to my earlier point about how this is not just something that affects minorities, is that this notion of constantly making the majority feel threatened and that you present yourself as the savior is actually the classic way in which you create a vote bank that will blindly continue to back you no matter what you do, no matter how you perform. So you could be taking decisions that may actually be harmful to you, to you as voters or to you as a society, but you continue to repeatedly invest in the same set of people because that's how they positioned it. So the same argument that the Hindu right makes, that these other so-called secular parties have turned minorities into a vote bank, and minorities aren't doing very well, and they're actually right. Muslims rank the lowest in almost all social and educational parameters, but yet will continue to vote for certain parties because they feel that they're being protected. The exact same thing is happening in reverse. And I think that, in a sense, speaks to what you're saying, that one of the reasons these theories are so important for their continuation and power is that now you've created a Hindu vote bank. And no matter what happens in terms of governance, policy, etc., you still are assured that this sentiment will override your otherwise cognitive way of responding and saying, hey, this is not going so well for me. Maybe I should think about, changing things up. So I think that's why it
Right.
affects all of us.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you have the mic here. Yeah, the mic.
Hi, Nagesh Sharma. I just was wondering what the terminology is if the guy is a Hindu and the girl is a Muslim. Is that love jihad or is it Hindu jihad or?
Is that a thing? Is that a thing? I mean, like, how is that? How is
Huh?
that
So,
defined?
Actually, that's something that we've delved into in the book.
oh, okay.
So, what has happened now is that your name and your religion determines your crime. If you're a Muslim man having a problem with your Hindu partner, then it's love jihad. If it's a Hindu man and a Muslim woman, it's relationship issues, ghar ki baat, right? So we have examples. So one of the main things about love jihad that they talk about is that men hide their identities and marry multiple times, etc. Like Muslim men fake a Hindu identity, or they marry multiple women by faking their identity, etc. That's one of the many definitions of love jihad that the right wing would give you. We had found a case of Mr. Swain, Pratap Chandra Swain from Odisha, who had faked his identity and, if I'm not wrong, had married 18 different women. But he will not make it to any love jihad list anywhere, VHP or otherwise, because that's gender crime.
There's a OTT series being made on him. There's an OTT series being made on him. It's already been made on Netflix.
No, and in fact, we found another example because we'd filed RTIs asking for examples of cases registered under the conversion law. And we got virtually no response. But one of the specific responses we got was from a case in Jharkhand where a woman, Abida Begum, was married to what she thought was a Muslim man for many years. And then it turned out his name was Buddhadev Thakur. And he'd pretended to be a Muslim, and he actually had another wife. But we don't have a label for this yet. So like we throw it to the house if you want to come up with something creative.
This is
So
in fact, we'd asked we'd interviewed somebody from the VHP for the book, and he said, "नहीं इनको बहलाया फुसलाया जाता है." I said, हर relationship में बहलाया फुसलाया जाता है ना? I mean, that's what the whole point is. You're trying to woo a woman.
Yeah.
You say, हाँ हाँ वो तो होता है, but
No, but also I think it's a question of.
And then I just have a very brief question.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
So it's, I mean, everything what you've discussed, we sort of know. But I really do think that this reservoir of insanity or nastiness was always in us. This regime has sort of legitimized it. What you used to say in the privacy of your bedroom, you are coming out and talking about it in public forums, social media, everywhere. But what really flummoxes me is this mass hoodwinking that is taking place. Totally. Even amongst people, all of us have experienced it. People you have known all your lives, and suddenly you don't know them anymore. In your families, in your friend circles, in your colleagues, multinationals, wherever you think of. So, a very good point about journalists are not gatekeepers of institutions. But then who are? And how can we stop this? I mean, I'm every day, like many of us, are astounded by the level of hoodwinking that is going on in every field. One example is this whole glorious Bharat thing. Go take any newspaper like an NYT or a Post. Look at how many times China is mentioned in India.
Yeah,
So
sure.
many things like that. So
Yeah, there's actually an article on this from a few years ago. It was it explored this entire concept, and I can recommend a podcast also on this. It starts off with the online disinhibition syndrome, which is what social media gave us. Things that you'd say, like you said, people who you've known for years have never said that, but they don't have a problem typing it out on social media. In fact, where my office is my neighbor, he thinks I don't go over the social media. He abuses me regularly on Twitter, but when we face each other, he's like, so Time Magazine did a cover story on the online disinhibition syndrome, and what that has led to is a lot of people thought a lot of things, but they didn't know there were other people who thought that as well. So this has made that those tribes grow, and what that has led to is because of market and incentives, what that really asked that it's not just people have suddenly emerged and are articulating what they thought. No, some of them have actually started thinking that way because any society works on reward incentives and disincentives, and the economic incentives are the most important incentives in any society. And right now there's an economic incentive to bigotry, so I think that makes a big difference. So this online disinhibition syndrome has led to what you're talking about everywhere in the US, with Trump putting that black on black crime before he was taken off Twitter. It was complete demonstrably false data. It was fact checked by mainstream media, but he still kept it up, and he did not take it down. It didn't affect his prospects. So, and the whole thing anti elitism is, like Bapu was a thought elite. I think the people, but you wouldn't say that. And what it allows you to do is that, like, Mariam and Vasu have written this book, they've done a lot of research. It doesn't take much for me to say, Abhi Brandu chup kar, Twitter pe. So we are equals. You see, I could not do that to Messi. Na chal nikal stadium se main khelta hu. But today you can say to nikal studio se, I have another guy who'll just spout nonsense, will get sponsors, often from governments and government proxies, and will be able to run a successful news brand, which is why we at News Laundry say, pay to keep news free, because when the public pays, the public is served. And I have been taught no matter where you go, don't ever leave without plugging your product. So if you're a product
I love that. That was I must learn from this. What a masterful segue. Masterful segue. By the way, Abhinandan has fielded the question admirably. So it's good to have a sort of third co-panelist who's also a moderator. But just to say that I didn't actually say that the media are not gatekeepers. The media are very important gatekeepers. I was simply responding to the point that the idea that how do you actually change public opinion and how do you actually get to the stage where you're altering how children think and all of that is, I think, too great a burden to place on the institution of the media, which has an important role, but it's also in some ways a circumscribed role. Now, there could be arguments about how you tell your stories differently and more creatively so you reach a wider constituency. But for the most part, you are still going out there every day and simply reporting on the news and pushing back against propaganda and falsehoods and so on and so forth. So I meant it more in that context.
Mariam, any closing comments from you? Or anything you want to plug your product, your
No, no. No, like Abhinandan so beautifully put it. It's in the age of social media, it's become a lot more difficult. Like the example she said there, where the power used to cut in the morning, and she had this conspiracy theory in her head. Okay, is this something to do with discriminating against Muslims? Her father came and nipped it in the bud, right? But now, cut to, if suppose she was a child in today's age, she's not going to talk to her parents, she's going to post it on social media, right? She'll find 10 other people who will agree with her. Earlier, if a 13-year-old boy or a 13-year-old girl came up with for the lack of a better word, a stupid theory like that, you would have immediately the people around you immediately nipping that in the bud. But now you go on social media, you'll find 10 other people who believe in the same theory as you do, which kind of gives it a sense of legitimacy. And of those 10 people, some of them are mainstream politicians. Oh, they're people in positions of power, so they should know better. They would know better, so they're agreeing with me. So there's that. And over that, there's also your mainstream media, which are flashing headlines on their television screens and have holding debate, half an hour, 1 hour debate shows on these matters. Oh, so they are also agreeing with me. So you see, there's an entire sort of ecosystem that's come up.
and there's an economic incentive to that. Let's take it
Yeah,
one step
exactly.
further, which is why after the Love Jihad success of Love Jihad Part 2, Thuk Jihad, that whole Thuk Jihad, part 3, fertilizer jihad. There's just add that and Jaws 1, Jaws 2, Jaws 3, just keep churning them out, and there's an economic incentive to that. So, we'll wind up here because it is 9. Okay, we can. Okay, fine. Yes.
Good evening, I'm Shama Sethi. We've always called ourselves a secular country and we've portrayed ourselves as a democracy and very secular to the whole world. In the last 10 years, I find Hindutva has become the norm. And at a dinner, there was somebody at the dinner, and a lady and a gentleman asked her, "How is your husband now?" And she said, "Allah ka shukar hai, unki tabiyat zara theek hai." And this other gentleman comes up and he says, "There is no Allah. There is only Hindu gods here." And I was just taken aback. How are we going to settle this issue?
There, there are elections coming up. So, I mean, there's that. So, the answer, I'm sorry to sound like a stuck record, the answer lies in the question or the way that you framed it. You began by saying in the last 10 years, right? So, what has happened in the last 10 years? What has changed? It obviously changed with some kind of political shift or change of guard, right? All of us are in different ways tracing back this current moment to that shift. That was a political shift. How do you counter a political shift with another political shift? So we can go on about social media echo chambers and disinformation and conversations we're having in our homes and schools and all of that. But it's largely coming from that change. Even the online conversation, the nature, the shape it's taken, is not happening by accident. These theories aren't coming from nowhere. There's a clear design to it. Of course, at some point it takes on a virality of its own and it kind of enters society. But this is not a random occurrence. We have enough evidence to know that everything that seems random is actually being engineered with a very clear view. So, unfortunately or fortunately, my response to this always is that if this is uh, coming from a position of power or is coming from a position of political authority, then largely that's the only way things will change, right? And now what it takes to change that is a whole set of factors, which also has to do with our blessed opposition parties and all of that. But ultimately, to me, this current phenomenon, that's really where the answer lies.
And economic incentives matter, as history has taught us. Yeah, go
And
ahead.
just to add to that, I know you said this was at a dinner party, but I mean, in that case, I would ask you to even consider your guest list, because I think at this point we've reached a juncture where we have to say we are not going to excuse such behavior. We are not going to give any, you, we are beyond.
No, but yeah, but I think one should push back. That's
One
I
should,
mean, I've
you
started
can't
even
give
on
the
WhatsApp
time
groups.
to give people the benefit of doubt. I think it's over. Like you said, it's been 10 years now that these theories have been brewing, and you've seen the consequences of these come out. And you know that these are not, like we said, these are not benign theories, or these are not benign opinions that you hold anymore. These are divisive, bigoted theories that are having real world consequences for you, for me, for everyone, and for the very idea of the nation that we live in. So I think it's time to push back.
Last quick comment on that, because there's this compulsion that anchors must always have the last word. But I think that I have a slightly different take on this idea that you have to kind of, shun people with a different view. Like, for example, like this book was written as a challenge and as a work of persuasion. It's a challenge to those who are putting these theories out to say, okay, like this is our response. Now you respond to this. But it's also on the assumption that there is a vast swath of sensible Indians who do not subscribe to what's going on, but possibly because of the decibel of the noise that's coming and where it's coming from, may be swayed by it, right? All of us tend to do that. You start to think, okay, maybe there's something to it. So we'd still like to think that there is a way in which, I mean, this could be completely optimistic and unrealistic and naive, that you can actually reach out to the better angels of people with facts and evidence and
No, I
the
can't.
good old sensible like guardrails of a sane society and
Sure.
hope that something shifts.
No, I agree. I think that's very true, and it is possible because I, from experience, and I'll just close with the whole budgets and how social media makes such a big difference. I'm not particularly into Pehelwani or bodybuilding, as you might have seen, but I I happened to watch a video on Insta. Does anyone know if it's from your state? At least one of them is of Rajat Dalal and Rajveer, the fight that's happening. How many of you are aware of that? It's huge. It's like it's got more traction on Instagram than any of these discussions we have. These are two Pehelwans. One is from Haryana, and one is and they are going at each other. One is Gujjar Samaj and Jat Samaj, the other is Rajput Samaj, and they're saying, we'll go at you. And it led to people landing up. The police had to intervene because people started gathering, Jat Gujjar versus. And I just haven't watched one, and I was fascinated. And now each time I log on, I'm flooded with reels and I consume them. And I've picked a side. Now you see, because I don't know anything about Pehlwani and who these guys are. I'm on Raja Dalal's side. Now you see, the thing is that a lot of people, for them, politics is like what Pehlwani is to me. मैंने कहा ये बंदा ठीक बात कर रहा है यार. He that other guy doesn't look nice. He's going in his Scorpio with loud music. I don't like the look of him. But this guy is talking from an akhada. I like the look of him. I think Rajat Bhai is right. Rajveer is the villain here. A lot of people take political positions like that. And which is why this whole, being able to persuade them is very true. And I've experienced that. So on that note, I will once again say we can talk about media. We can say budgets matter. But we must, vote with our brain and support news with our wallet. So go to newslearner.com, click on the subscribe button and pay to keep news free, because we don't take any ads, neither from Patanjali, neither from Ambani, neither from Adani, neither from Modi, neither from Khattar, neither from Kejriwal or anybody else who are flooding ads everywhere. So if you think your media is serving you, it's not, it's serving the advertiser. And because Newsletter doesn't take ads, do log on, subscribe and pay to keep news free. And also while you're at it, you must buy this book. Do so now. And they'll be signing the book. So you can buy it right now, get it signed, and with a persuasive line, which I'm sure they'll be able to give you. Thank you so much.